Section 2.3. In this section, you will be given a question like this. Here's a bar written for the clarinet in B flat. This bar has been transposed down a major second to be at concert pitch. There are some mistakes. Put a tick or cross underneath the key signature and each note to show whether each is correct or incorrect. Now, this may all seem a little bit difficult because we don't know a lot of the terms here. So before we even do this question, let's break down some of the key terms here. First, what are transposing instruments? They are instruments that sound different from the written pitch. For example, if we have a C as the written pitch, a transposing instrument, depending on their type, will be making a different sound than the written pitch. The trumpet in B flat and the clarinet in B flat, for instance, will be making a B flat sound in this case. In other words, they sound a major second lower. Now, the term major second is a specific term that describes the distance of two semitones. There are a number of these terms, and each describe a different distance between two notes, and this is something we'll come back to in a later video. However, for now, just remember the term major second is equal to a distance of two semitones, and you can see that in this example we have a C going down one semitone to the B and another semitone B flat. Meanwhile, another transposing instrument such as the clarinet in A will be sounding the written pitch as an A note this time. And the distance between them is described as a minor third, again a term that we'll come back to in a later video, and for now all we have to know is that a minor third is equal to 3 semitones in terms of the distance. Lastly, there are also the transposing instruments of the horn in F and called Anglais that will play the written pitch at a much lower pitch, and this time the distance is called the perfect fifth, which is equal to 7 semitones. Again, we'll come back to the term perfect fifth in a later video. So, all in all, when a transposing instrument sees a written pitch, when they play it, they will make a different sound, and this depends on their type. For example, trumpet in B flat and clarinet in B flat, they sound 2 semitones lower, and the clarinet in A sounds 3 semitones lower, and the horn in F and called Anglais sound 7 semitones lower, and all of these pitches that are different from the written pitch are typically called the concert pitch, or sometimes the sounding pitch. You may be wondering now, why do they play a different pitch than the written pitch? Well, the reasons go far back into history, and this is probably not the place to talk about it. However, in short, the transposing mechanism actually makes life a little easier for some instruments. Take the clarinet in B flat and A, for example. Their constructions are essentially the same, with the clarinet in A being a little longer and able to play lower notes. Now, because the constructions are so similar, it makes sense to keep the fingering exactly the same. In other words, the player can use the exact same fingering on the clarinet in B flat on the clarinet in A without having to relearn everything, and instead it's more like letting the clarinet do all the heavy lifting of transposing. Put differently, you may also imagine yourself playing on an electric keyboard. You play everything in C major. But what if you want to play everything in C sharp major? Well, there are two ways basically. The first way is actually to play it as a C sharp major, so you will have to deal with all the black notes on the keyboard. Or, because we are playing an electric keyboard, that means we can simply press a button to raise all the notes by 1 semitone higher. That means when you play a C major scale, it's going to be conveniently sounding as a C sharp major scale. And essentially the same logic applies to the transposing instruments. The pressing of the transposing button on the electric keyboard is basically the same as changing the instrument, for example, from an A clarinet to a B flat clarinet. Now let's come back to this question then. Having understood the ideas of written pitch and concert pitch, we should now be able to do this. In this question, we have to double check that the notes are transposed correctly by the required interval, in this case a major second, because the music at the top is for the clarinet in B flat at the written pitch. So everything is going to sound a major second lower, or 2 semitones. Now let's ignore the first box for now, because we'll deal with that later. Starting with the second box then. For the written pitch, we have an A. Now let's take out our little keyboard again. Since we have an A here, when we go down 2 semitones, that means going down to the A flat and then the G, the correct answer will be a G in this case. And therefore we put a tick here, because that basically means we have transposed the note by a major second lower. Now looking at the second box here, for the written pitch we have a C. So let's say we count down by 2 semitones again. We have C going down 1 semitone, a B, and then we have a B flat. So that would be the correct answer. However, in the option down there, we now have a B double flat, which is 1 semitone too many. So that's gonna be a wrong answer. For the next note, we have the written pitch of E. Now again, looking at the keyboard here, we go down 2 semitones. So E going to E flat being the first semitone, and E flat to D being the second semitone. And if we look at the answer down there, that's indeed a D. So that's the correct one. Next note, we have the written pitch of D. Again, going down by 2 semitones, we therefore get D flat down to the C. So this is again a correct answer. Next, we have a written B note there. And if we go down 2 semitones, that means going to B flat and A. This makes it a correct answer again. Lastly, we have the written pitch of a G. Again, if we go down 2 semitones, that means going to the F sharp down to the F natural. And therefore, the answer is wrong. Because of the answer down there, the F sharp is only 1 semitone lower than the G. Now let's come back to the very first box. Here we need to consider if the key signature itself is correctly transposed. And in order to do that, we need to learn how to read key signatures. At some point in music, you may have come across charts like this, which indicates the keys of the piece. For example, a C major piece has no accidentals whatsoever. However, a piece in B major, for example, will have 5 sharps, or G flat major, which has 6 flats. Now, instead of memorizing them all, which will probably take you some time, there's actually a quicker way to do it. And here's how. To identify the major keys, for those with the sharp accidental, what you can do is to look for the last sharp and go up by 1 semitone, and that will tell you what major key you are in. For example, let's look at the G major. The last sharp here is the F sharp, well, because it's the only sharp here anyway, and if you go up by 1 semitone from F sharp to G, that will be your G major. Now the next example is the D major here. If you notice, the last sharp is a C sharp, and if you go up a semitone, that means a D, and that's your D major. Next, we have the A major, and the last sharp is a G sharp, and if you go up a semitone from the G sharp, you get your A major. Next, we have the key of E major, which is a semitone higher than the last sharp, the D sharp. And then we have a B major here, which is a semitone higher than the last sharp, A sharp. And then we have the F sharp major, which is a semitone higher than the E sharp. Lastly, we have the C sharp major, which is a semitone higher than the B sharp. For the flat keys, we look for the second last flats, because they tell us exactly what the key is in major key. In the first example, we have B flat major, in which the second last flat is the B flat. And in the next example, E flat major, the second last flat is an E flat. And the remaining examples follow the same logic. In A flat major, the second last flat is an A flat. In D flat major, the second last flat is D flat. In G flat major, the second last flat is G flat. And in C flat major, the second last flat is a C flat. Now that we have learned about how to read key signatures quickly, we'll be able to come back to this question and complete the first box. In the music at the top, we have 1 sharp. By using the method that we just discussed, we'll be able to tell what key it is very quickly. In this case, it's an F sharp, so if we go up by one semitone, it becomes a G, and this will be a G major. Now, according to the question, the music needs to be transposed down a major second, or 2 semitones, to be at the concert pitch. So looking at the keyboard, we go from the G to G flat to the F, so that's 2 semitones lower. In other words, we need to find out the key signature for F major. And if you remember from our previous slide, for F major is the only key where we cannot use the method that we discussed, because in F major there's only one flat, and that's the B flat. And if you do remember the F major only has a B flat, that makes it a correct answer, because the music in this case has been transposed correctly by a major second. Now let's look at another example question. This time we have a piece of music written at the sounding pitch, and this is for the chord Anglais. And we need to determine if the music has been transposed up a perfect fifth correctly to be at the written pitch. Now that we have learned about how to read the key signatures correctly, we can begin by tackling the first box. According to the shortcut we have discussed, for flat keys, we look for the second last flat. In this case, the second last flat is an A flat, and therefore that makes it an A flat major. Now, in order to transpose this up a perfect fifth, or in other words, by 7 semitones, we can look at the keyboard again and count accordingly. So from A flat, we go up 7 semitones. So going from A flat to A, the first semitone up, and then B flat, the second semitone up, and B, the third, C, the fourth, D flat, the fifth, D, the sixth, and E flat, the seventh semitone. So we should be looking for a key signature that represents the E flat major key. However, looking at the key signature in the music in the bottom, we only have 2 flats, and the second last flat is the B flat, which means it's a B flat major key, but not an E flat major key. In other words, this is a wrong transposition, so we put a cross here. Moving forward, we have a G double sharp this time, and the logic continues. We need to transpose this up a perfect fifth, or 7 semitones. So let's count again. Now we have a G double sharp, that means we start from this key, A, and then we have the first semitone up, the A sharp, and then the second semitone B, the third semitone C, the fourth semitone C sharp, the fifth semitone D, the sixth semitone D sharp, and the seventh semitone and E. And there we have it, an E on the keyboard. And now looking at the music in the bottom, we have a D double sharp. If you still remember what enharmonic equivalent means, that means a note written differently but sounding the same. In this case, the E on the keyboard and the written D double sharp in the music, they are enharmonic equivalent. And now how do we determine if this is correct or not? In this case, the answer is correct, because we are asked to transpose the note by a perfect fifth. Now, the number 5 is very important in situations like this, because it tells us what letter names we need to be looking at. In this case, the 5 means the fifth note from the letter name G. So if we count the letter names, G being the first note, and then the second letter name will be the A, and the third is a B, the fourth is a C, and the fifth is a D. So a D double sharp in this case would be a correct way of expressing this note, but not the E, because the E would have been a sixth, but not a fifth. So this is a very important point in addition to the idea of counting semitones. In fact, this is also something that we'll come back to in a later video on the idea of intervals. But for now, just remember that apart from counting the correct number of semitones, we also have to make sure that the letter name itself correctly reflects the required steps. So in this case, it's a fifth step from the original note. Moving on to the next note, this time we have a D flat. Again, we start by counting 7 semitones up. So from the D flat to the D, the first semitone, and E flat, the second semitone, E, the third semitone, F, the fourth semitone, G flat, the fifth semitone, G, the sixth semitone, and A flat, the seventh semitone. Now looking at the music in the bottom, we have A but not the required A flat. So this is going to be a wrong answer. And we can already put a cross here and move on to the next note. The next note is a C. Again, we count 7 semitones. So from C to C sharp being the first semitone, and to D the second semitone, to D sharp the third semitone, the E fourth semitone, the F the fifth semitone, the G flat the sixth semitone, and G the seventh semitone. And in this case, we do have a G there, so that is the correct answer. Next, we have an A natural. And again, we count 7 semitones, so A going up to A sharp is the first semitone, to B the second semitone, C third semitone, D flat fourth semitone, D fifth semitone, E flat sixth semitone, and E, that will be the seventh semitone. And in our answer, we have an E flat here. Don't forget to factor in the key signature here, which applies to the E note. In other words, it's not the E natural that we're looking for, and therefore this is a wrong answer. And in the next note, we have a B flat here, and so we count 7 semitones again. So from B flat, we go to the B, the first semitone, and then to the C, the second semitone, D flat, the third, D the fourth, E flat, the fifth, E the sixth, and F the seventh. In this case, however, we have an F flat, so that's not going to be correct. So we can put a cross here again. The next one, we have an F note. And again, just count by going up. So F going to the G flat is the first semitone, and then the G being the second, the A flat being the third, A being the fourth, B flat being the fifth, B being the sixth, and C being the seventh. And now here, we have something interesting again. This time we have a B sharp, which is an enharmonic equivalent to the C. Now, recalling the first example where we have dealt with an enharmonic equivalent, we have learned that even if the number of semitones is correct, we also need to make sure that the letter names correctly reflect the required number of steps. So in this case, the transposed letter name needs to be the fifth letter name from the original note. So in this case, starting from the given letter name, the F this time, we go up to the second letter name, which is the G. And the third letter name is an A, the fourth the B, and the fifth letter name being the C. So in this case, we have to have the letter name of a C in order to make it a fifth, in this case a perfect fifth. And even though the number of semitones is correct between the two notes here, the fact that it's not a proper fifth makes it a wrong answer. So instead of a B sharp, it has to be a C in this case. And so we can put a cross in this box. Now, given that this is the second time we have encountered this situation, I thought I would share some tips on how to count the number of steps, or more precisely the idea of intervals, which we will come back to in a later video. In any case, we always have to ensure that the letter names are correct when we do questions like this. So for example, if you're dealing with a question that involves a second, you need to make sure that the letter names are always 2 steps. So in this case, for example, if we start on a B, then the second will be a C. Meanwhile, if it concerns a third, then the letter names must always have 3 steps. So in this case, let's say you are starting with a B, that means going from B, C to D. That's the third step, or the third letter name. Lastly, if you're dealing with a fifth, then we always have to have 5 letter names. So in this case, B, C, D, E to F. So back to our question, because the B sharp is not exactly 5 steps from the F, it's only 4 letter names, as in F, G, A, B, without the C, that makes it a wrong answer. Now for the last 2 notes, first we have the E double flat. So now applying the same logic, starting with the E double flat here, we go up 7 semitones, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We land on the A, and in the answer down there we have a G double sharp, which is an enharmonic equivalent to the A. However, because we're dealing with the idea of the fifth, we need to make sure that this A is actually a B double flat, because if we go up by 5 steps from the E, we will have E, F, G, A, B, 5 steps. So it has to be a B as the letter name. So in this case, the answer is going to be a wrong one. even if the number of semitones is correct. Last question, we have a C flat up there. That means starting from this note, we go up 1 semitone, 2 semitones, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's supposed to be a G flat. And in this case, we do have a correct G flat down there. And C going to G, in terms of letter name, that is also 5 steps. So C, D, E, F, G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is it. It can be a slightly difficult question to tackle, but in the exam there are usually 5 out of 75 marks that are allocated to this question. So it's really worth getting this right. Especially the logic and the way you count is always the same. That means once you know how to do it, you will be able to do it in a consistent way. If you're looking for some more practice, I'll highly recommend that you visit this interactive site where I've put together a lot of practice tests and mock papers with instant feedback. In the drill mode, you have access to all the questions section by section, so that you can focus on specific question types and practice them until you feel confident. There are virtually unlimited questions. In the exam mode, you have access to full papers in the exact format of the exam, with randomized questions each time. You have 2 hours to finish the complete paper, at the end of which you'll be given your score and feedback.